Hi, I'm Kris Culp, a Grebel alum from the early 1980s. I lived in residence at Grebel for 2 years, did a degree in French, and many years later, I'm living in Kitchener and working as a market research consultant. There's a reunion coming up on June 4th for Grebel grads from the late 70s and early 80s. I had the pleasure of catching up with a few people from that era, and I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I did. Jerry, it's nice to reconnect.
It certainly is.
You've had such a fascinating life and career. You went to Newfoundland, you lived there for 30 years. You held the position of the executive director of the Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador. So a lot has happened since you left Conrad Grebel, but let's go back to Grebel and take me back to your time there.
A lifetime ago.
A lifetime ago. What brought you to Conrad Grebel as opposed to another university? You grew up on a farm in Leamington, and so why not the University of Windsor?
Well, I guess part of my decision to go to Waterloo was I was interested in studying architecture, and it was one of three schools in Ontario that was offering that program. So that was partly it, but I think rather Waterloo than, say, University of Toronto was definitely in part because of Conrad Grebel College and that kind of sense of community, Mennonite community that was there.
Mm-hmm. Did you live in residence?
I did for 3 semesters, and then I guess I was an associate student probably for the rest of my career at Waterloo.
Mm-hmm. Who were your roommates?
Well, my first roommate, I can't remember his last name. It was Mark, a red-haired guy. And other roommates were Aubrey Houghton, with whom I became a good friend, and Rich Good, who's been a lifelong friend.
Any memorable, incidents or memories that you would like to share from residence life?
Oh, geez. Well, I remember, Gerhard Epp was a friend from Leamington, who I think his room was right across the hall from mine. And I certainly remember, oh God, what was the group that he played? He was into some pretty hard rock. And I remember that kind of blaring out of his room often. I think I have really good memories of, I was involved in choirs throughout my time at Conrad Grebel, and that's something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, and I guess just kind of the sense of a community and whatnot that was there.
Mm. So you came to Grebel or to the University of Waterloo to study architecture, and that evolved into an independent studies degree. Tell me about that. How did that evolve in that way?
Sure. Well, architecture was something I had wanted to be an architect ever since I was a kid. So I did about 3 years in the program, and then kind of had second thoughts. I was kind of really questioning modern architecture and some stuff about that, and probably going through some difficult kind of times myself in terms of my own, identity and what I believed. So, anyways, I took a couple of years off actually. And then I think part of the issue I had was just the pace of study. Architecture was a pretty intensive program. So I was really happy that Waterloo offered the independent studies faculty. I guess it was called integrated studies at the time, and that allowed you to set up your own program of study, by having a couple of supervisors. So that gave me a chance to really study, I think, at a pace that I wanted to, and to pursue some areas that I was particularly interested in, which was more in the area of architectural history and preservation. So I felt at the end that I got a really good education from Waterloo.
Definitely. Do you remember the Grebel courses that you took along the way?
Yeah, I did I guess probably Introduction to Mennonite History with Frank Epp. I did Modern Study of Jesus with John Miller. And a course that I really enjoyed was study of what was it? The study of utopian communities with Winfield Fretz. And so these are kind of names that go, you know, in terms of professors that go way back at Conrad Grebel. And you know, one of the things I think coming from Leamington and my Mennonite background was a real value for community, which is certainly something that Conrad Grebel reinforced. And then the course, that course, Sociology of Utopian Communities, we looked at these kind of intentional communities through history, and then we went to visit a modern day intentional community, Society of Brothers, I think it was called, in Pennsylvania, which was quite a moving experience for the people who were there. So I think this is something that I've kind of carried with me through much of my career, which has really been a combination of heritage preservation, but also community development work.
Fascinating. You mentioned to me in a conversation that you took Frank Epps' History of Mennonites course, and
Yeah.
out of that grew a creative project for you.
Yeah, as part of that, I guess I remember doing a major paper was on kind of my grandfather's story, which was, you know, I have the Russian Mennonite background, and kind of focused on particularly him as a young man, and the Selbstschutz, the self-resistance, and all that, and that kind of got me started then on really a history of writing my mother's family, the Lane family, which I did. Took me about 30 years to complete, and I was really, while I was at Grebel, I guess somehow I had contact with Lawrence Klippenstein, who was the archivist at CNBC at the time, and he said, "Oh, there's some material on microfilm," and it turned out it was a copy of a family chronicle that had started in 1725, and so that started me on this, you know, whole kind of course of writing this history, and then led to a further project, I guess not that many years ago, called Letters from Home, where together with my aunt, we translated my grandmother's letters from the Soviet Union from 1926 to 1940, and I made that into a book. So, and I even have an idea now, maybe see if I can use some of the information from my family chronicle to do an historical novel set in the Mennonite community in Danzig in the early 18th century. I don't know whether I have a novel in me, but it's a project that I think I'm going to try in retirement.
I love that. So what happened after you graduated? Take me through those years after you left the university.
Yes, well, the first job I had, I moved to Ottawa, and I worked for the then Heritage Canada Foundation, now known as the National Trust. And it was the early days of the Main Street program. They had done a number of pilots, so I got to travel to some different communities in Eastern Canada and kind of document them. And at the time, they were just rolling out the program, and I knew that Carbonear, Newfoundland was being considered as one of the projects. So I applied and subsequently got it. It was just, I had lived in different parts of Canada, but never the East. So I thought, well, I'll spend a few years there and then go do something else. And that turned into more than a 35-year career in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so the Main Street program was really kind of heritage preservation, but also using heritage assets as a community development tool. And then that kind of morphed into a job with a regional community development agency called Community Futures. And then I guess for a while I was executive director of a heritage umbrella organization. And then that moved into, for 10 years, I was director of heritage with the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And then for the last 5 years of my career, I was executive director of Heritage NL, which was a Crown agency that supported built heritage preservation, but also intangible cultural heritage. So it was a great way to kind of finish off my career. And I forgot to mention that somewhere in there, I decided I would get into the inn business. So I restored an 1826 house and ran it as a heritage inn. That was in the town of Harbor Grace. which was an interesting experience.
Did you have visitors from all over the world coming to stay at that inn?
Oh, certainly. Seemed to be a lot from the UK, a lot of Canadians. I was trying to remember whether I had anybody from Conrad Grebel. I believe Mark and Glennis Yancey stayed with me, and they certainly visited me my time there. And over the years, I've certainly had a number of Grebel friends visit Newfoundland.
Mm-hmm. I understand you've also renovated a church that sits on a rocky ledge overlooking the ocean, if I've got it right. And that's your
That's correct.
summer home?
Yes, I had no intention of doing so, but a good friend had a summer place in a small community about an hour and a half out of St. John's called New Chelsea, and the old United Church was closing, and there was some fear that it was going to be torn down. So I thought, oh, I can't let that happen. So I put in a proposal, and that was probably 10, 12 years ago, and ended up with an 1870s wooden church. So that's been an ongoing project, restoring that. It's probably a project that'll never end, but it's a beautiful location.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love
Can you
spending time up there.
describe the view for me? If you
Oh, well, the back of the church, there's kind of a little bit of a kind of a rocky hill, and then that overlooks the ocean. So the bay of that community. And a couple of years ago, I built myself a little workshop, and it has a deck that overlooks that view of the water. So,
sounds
and
stunning.
it's incredibly peaceful place too. And I've had, it's a place that I love to host friends, and have had lots of friends there over the years.
Mm-hmm. Wow. In 2009, you did a master's in cultural geography at Memorial University. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what is cultural geography.
Well, cultural geography really is, and geography generally is the study of place, and cultural geography looks at the cultural and the human dimensions of that in terms of both how people create place, and also how they are impacted, or how their culture is impacted by place. And part of what I wanted to do, it was much later in my career. It was really just as I was starting the director of heritage job. I wanted to use my study as a way to kind of have a little more critical look at heritage. So I found it great to go back to school after all those years to get back into the world of ideas, but also to think a little bit more critically about my work in heritage.
So thinking of Conrad Grebel, if you think of Grebel through the lens of a cultural geographer, and you think about people inhabiting that place, are there any thoughts that come to mind from that perspective?
Well, I think probably what I take away from Conrad Grebel in particular was a sense of community. And that was something that I think was very valuable for me. I mean, a farm boy from Leamington ending up at a big university, having that sense of community was something that was really valuable for me. And it was, a really lovely location, set on a little lake, just a little bit set off from the rest of the university. So, yeah, I think it's a very special sense of place.
Mm-hmm. As someone who specializes in historical preservation, if we go ahead 100 years and Conrad Grebel is a historical building, what are the features that you would really want to preserve about that building?
Well, first I would say, I think it's really important that even now we take steps to preserve our modernist heritage. I mean, if we look at modernism, it kind of, goes from the 1930s on. Even stuff that was built in the 60s and 70s, I mean, that's now 50, 60 years ago. I don't think there's always an appreciation for that we think of our historical buildings have to be 100 years or more. And I think one of the things that's was particular and kind of interesting architecturally about the college was the residential building with those kind of little peaks on the top, and the chapel building itself, with the field stone and the stained glass. I have to say, I think some of the subsequent buildings are at Grebel are a little bit nondescript. So I really think the old residential building is kind of the architectural gem there. So I hope as 100 years, I suppose, who knows how many more times the college will be renovated and built onto, but I hope there's a sense of that original college. And clearly there was a vision and a strong architectural vision there. And the setting too, overlooking a lake and in a treed environment. That was quite lovely.
Are you going to be joining us at the reunion in June, either in person or virtually?
Well, I'd like to. I'd like to be there in person. We'll kind of see what COVID brings. It's a little bit difficult to make travel plans these days, but I'm trying to get back to Ontario as much as I can. I have elderly parents, and trying to spend as much time there as I can. So one way or the other, I'd like to take part.
And I'm sure everybody would love to hear an update on, now that you've retired, what's your life like now?
Well, I retired. I met someone. I met a guy through a mutual friend who lives here in the Annapolis Valley. We're right at the western end of the valley. And I probably would have been still working if I hadn't met him, but also the fact that I had lost a number of friends over the last few years from cancer, people around my age, and kind of got me thinking, well, with whatever time I have left, what do I really want to be doing? So I decided to retire, and I moved here to the Annapolis Valley. It's a beautiful part of the world. We have 15 acres, a 1908 farmhouse, and wood. It's lots of woodland that backs onto the North Mountain here. So my first decision was, taking the advice of a good friend, is when you retire, don't say yes to any new boards, and don't take on any contract work. So I heeded that, and I feel like now, after several months, I'm ready to get back into some of my volunteer commitments, and I'm really enjoying not being beholden to anybody. So I think I'm gonna, at this point, say no to contract work. It was kind of tempting. So I like building stuff, so and landscape. So my partner Owen dug a pond a couple of years ago, so I've been landscaping that, kind of a Japanese style garden, and I built a sauna on the edge of it, which we've been really enjoying this winter. And I'm just about to build my first timber frame building, a workshop, which will be a prototype for a cabin that we plan to build on a lake on some property we have about an hour and a half from here.
Wow. And what do you do on the property? You said, how many acres is it?
The property here is 15 acres. So we garden, and as I say, I've been doing landscape, hauling a lot of rocks. I like working with rock.
Yeah.
Although we don't have as much and as readily available rock as we did in Newfoundland, but there's still some here.
Yes. Well, that sounds like a fitting way to perhaps end our conversation. You're still working with rock after all those years.
Still working with rock.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. It's been fascinating. I've loved hearing about your life, and look forward to talking to you more in June.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. Take care.
Yeah.